Hi everyone, welcome to Module 4, Part 2 of our Risk Assessment course. This is GCU from the University of Minnesota, and in this part, we will learn about risk communication in assessing emerging technology. Our learning objective for this section is to develop effective risk communication techniques. These techniques should be tailored to meet the needs of different audiences, and they must account for varying levels of uncertainty. The goal is to ensure that critical safety information is understood, trusted, and acted upon, no matter who the audience is or how complex the situation may be. Risk communication plays a vital role when dealing with emerging technologies. These technologies often come with high uncertainty and complex risks, so clear and precise communication is essential. The stakeholders we communicate with, whether they are workers, regulators, policymakers, or the public, may have different levels of technical expertise, which means our messaging must be tailored to their needs. If we fail to communicate risks effectively, we risk eroding trust and creating resistance to new technologies, which can hinder their adoption and safe use. When communicating risks about emerging technologies, we face several challenges. The first is scientific uncertainty. There is often a lack of long-term data on cumulative or low-dose exposures, which makes it harder to provide definite guidance. Second, misinformation and fear can shape public perception, especially when media coverage is sensationalized or incomplete. Finally, differentiating risks is important. Understanding the difference between acute and chronic risks allows us to recommend appropriate and proportional safety measures. One of the core strategies for effective risk communication is maintaining transparency and basing our messages on evidence. This starts with using trusted sources such as NIEHS, OSHA, EPA, and peer-reviewed research to ensure credibility and accuracy. We should also avoid language that is overly alarmist or dismissive. For example, instead of saying there is no risk, a better approach is to acknowledge the current evidence suggests low risk, but continued monitoring is needed. In the meantime, here are the precautions we're taking. This builds trust while encouraging informed decision-making. Another important strategy is tailoring communication to different audiences. For workers, we need to provide clear and actionable safety instructions they can apply immediately, such as if you handle metal additive manufacturing powders, wear an N95 respirator and use the local exhaust system. For regulators, the message should be data-driven and framed in regulatory-compliant language. For example, our process aligns with NIEHS's exposure guidelines for engineered nanomaterials. For the public and media, it's best to use simple and relatable language, avoiding technical jargon. Like nanotechnology can make medicine safer, but we must ensure worker safety by following strict safety protocols. This ensures each group receives information they can understand and act on. When communicating risk, it's important to address uncertainty in a way that informs without causing unnecessary fear. One approach is probability-based risk framing. Instead of simply saying the exposure is dangerous, you might explain that workers exposed for over 20 years to high concentration of this material have a 10% increased risk of lung disease. This provides context and quantifies the risk. Another strategy is to use visual tools to help audiences understand complex information. For example, infographics can compare risks such as carbon nanotube exposure versus diesel exhaust, in a relatable way. Heat maps can also be used to highlight high-risk zones in a nanotechnology manufacturing plant, making the risks more tangible and easier to act on. Visual tools can make risk communication more engaging and easier to understand. On the left, the infographic compares carbon nanotubes and diesel exhaust. It highlights differences in their sources, laboratory research for carbon nanotubes and heavy vehicles for diesel exhaust, and their particle sizes, with nanotubes being about 1 nanometer and diesel exhaust around 100 nanometers. On the right, the heat map shows how risk can be visualized spatially. The red areas indicate zones with the highest potential exposure in a nanotechnology manufacturing plant, while green areas show lower risk zones. Tools like these help stakeholders quickly grasp where and how risks occur, making it easier to prioritize safety measures. Two-way engagement ensures that risk communication is not just top-down, but also incorporates feedback from those affected. First, worker involvement in risk assessment is critical. This can include regular surveys and feedback loops to identify concerns, as well as on-the-ground discussions to co-develop safety procedures that are both practical and effective. Second, engaging the public and media helps build broader awareness. Town hall meetings can address emerging risks such as 3D printing emissions in schools and homes. Digital outreach, including social media and short educational videos, can explain complex topics like cumulative exposure in simple, relatable terms. This two-way communication builds trust and promotes active participation in risk management.
This lesson has been created by the Interdisciplinary Training, Education, and Research Activities for Assessing and Controlling Contaminants from Emerging Technologies program, a collaboration of the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, the University of Iowa College of Public Health, and the University of California, Los Angeles Fielding School of Public Health. Funding for InTERACCT is provided by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences of the National Institutes of Health. The content of this lesson is the sole responsibility of the developers and does not necessarily represent the official views of the National Institutes of Health.